always embrace the challenges before me. Acha, 400 par is a joke, 300 par is impossible. 200 par may be a challenge for them. I go to a temple to pray, I don't go to a temple to participate in a political event. A Prime Minister is a Prime Minister for all Indians. He's often said all the right things, he's often done all the wrong things.
Hello, welcome to PTI and to our show at 4 Parliament Street. It's a show where senior editors of PTI and I interact with newsmakers. In this episode, we have Dr. Shashi Tharoor, one of the most recognized faces in Indian politics. He's a 3-time MP from Thiruvananthapuram and is very confident of getting elected for the 4th time. Elections are over in Kerala and he has just returned from there. And before he heads out for campaigning in other states, we caught up with Dr. Shashi Tharoor. Dr. Tharoor, welcome to PTI.
Thank you, Vijay.
You've been an international diplomat, an author of 25 books, a politician, a debater, a logophile, and a polymath. These last 2 words remind me that you have an extensive vocabulary of the English language. Tell me, how do you manage to remain so modest?
Well, you've been very kind in even saying all of these things, so I will assume that you meant them. And this is not merely a way of disarming the interviewee before the stiletto is sunk into between his ribs. But no, I mean, look, I'm a human being with a number of reactions to the world, and I've been privileged in being able to manifest those reactions in different fields of activity that are of interest to me. So some come through my writing, which in some ways is the easiest because it's you and your page one day, or you and your computer screen these days, to express your thoughts. Otherwise, when you manifest your reaction to the world through your work, that again depends on the opportunities you get in the workspace, whether it's the UN, whether it's politics. I've done different things at different times. And I must admit that for me, when I've had those responsibilities, I've given them my priority. I've always seen writing as more of a personal hobby or a personal pleasure. And therefore, for example, whenever work had to take precedence, it did. And my laptops over the years were littered with uncompleted manuscripts because it was always clear to me where the priorities lay. And that's perhaps been, to some degree, a limitation. There was a wonderful review of one of my books in the Washington Post. The guy said, if only this fellow would give up his day job, what a great writer he might have been, kind of thing, which is a sort of slightly left-handed compliment because it obviously meant that I didn't quite achieve the level that he would have liked to have seen me coming up with. But anyway, I mean, I think that's the answer to your question, is that I always embrace the challenges before me and I approach them with the best of my ability and with usually 100% commitment. And that keeps you modest.
Doesn't it ever go to your head? I mean, you are a man of so many talents.
Now, I'm always, first of all, I have my feet on the ground and that I'm very, very conscious that the world is full of people who can do things I can't do. And therefore, I never allow myself any sense of satisfaction that there are things I can do that perhaps others can't do as well or as in quite the same way. And therefore, I approach everyone with the same sense of respect, that they have skills and talents, I have skills and talents. Mine happen to be these, theirs happen to be something else. And that I respect them for who they are, and I hope they will respect me for who I am. That's really my core principle in life. And that's kept me grounded. I must admit that I'm pleased that from my teenage years onwards, no one has ever said that I behave differently towards one person or another because of their rank or their position or their wealth or their caste or their religion or anything like that. For me, every human being is equally deserving of the same level of respect and attention, and that has applied throughout my life. And people I've admired and respected also treat people that way. That's been my approach to most.
To take the opening question forward, a career diplomat, a prolific writer. You've been in politics since the last 15 years or so. Mm-hmm. So do you at times feel that you're an outsider in politics?
You know, a lot of people made me feel that way at the beginning, when I was indeed a newcomer to politics. I mean, I don't know how long anyone can be called an outsider when they've been doing something. And in my case, I chose the hard route. I chose to actually seek validation from the people and not coming into a comfortable perch in the Rajya Sabha or something like that. And having come in and fought, as it were, to earn the right to represent the people, such comments, to my mind, seem to me ill-founded. Because there are a lot of people who are given a lot of respect in politics who never face the electorate, or at least never face the electorate successfully. I've done it 3 times, and I hope now a 4th time is coming up. And to my mind, that's something which ought to end this conversation about my being an outsider. I don't claim to have been a typical politician. I didn't climb up the same route. Though I was involved in student politics in my university days, that was not for a recognized political party. We had a non-political students' union at St. Stephen's. And subsequently, I went abroad and therefore didn't actually climb up the greasy pole, as they would say, in domestic politics, the way most of my colleagues have done. I credit them for what they've accomplished over the years in politics, but I expect some acknowledgement and respect for what I have done outside in my own field. And I've come back and I've paid my dues, and I've climbed, shall we say, from being that outsider fresher who went through all the ragging that freshers go through, to being somebody who I think has earned his spurs, at least in some ways, in our political arena.
So if I may ask, which of these 3 careers have been most gratifying?
Look, each one has its own satisfactions. Obviously, there's a particular personal satisfaction associated with the books, because that's your own creation. And if they do well, or they win awards, or they're recognized, or readers come up to you gushing with praise, that personal satisfaction that you have put this on paper and it's meant something to people. But though in other cases my professional work is within institutions or larger fields of endeavor, I will say that I've also had that kind of feedback from people for my personal contribution in those fields. And whenever a young person comes up to me, which happens very often, and I don't want to boast about it, but lots of people coming up to me saying how inspired they are by things I've said or done or written, then that again offers a tremendous amount of satisfaction. In politics, there's the additional satisfaction of making a difference in people's lives. And that has ranged from a number of individual cases I've been able to help to major public initiatives that have affected lakhs of people. When I was able to persuade my friend, the UAE foreign minister, to install a consulate in Thiruvananthapuram, literally lakhs of Keralites who had to travel to other states to get their visas to go are suddenly finding it possible to do it in their own state. When I was able to break through a 40-year logjam to get a highway built from Thiruvananthapuram up to the Tamil Nadu border. The highway is supposed to go up to Kanyakumari, but my responsibility ended at the border. That is now going to transform that region for generations to come. And I know how much single-handed effort it took to get to that point. The stones had been laid on people's lands 40 years earlier. The project had lapsed. And people were saying, we can't do anything with our land because people say the government could take it over any time. So please just get the stones removed, get this project cancelled. And I went the other way and I got the project built. And they were happy because they got a far higher price than they would have got had the project taken place 40 years earlier. But more important, there's now a 4-lane highway, which has transformed opportunities on both sides of it, all the way to the Tamil Nadu border. Now, these are examples of things where you know that your own initiative has got some things done that will transform lives for the better. That is something very important. In the case of the UN work, it was more, I would say, leaving one's smudgy thumbprints on the footnotes of the pages of history, because you were dealing with issues of global resonance. Most of my career was spent as an anonymous figure dealing with issues that were featuring in the top 4 stories of the BBC World News every day. And that has its own satisfactions, in the sense that as somebody who'd been a student of history and of international affairs, for me to actually be a participant, it didn't matter that my name was not in the headlines, the politicians' names were there. But I was there, writing the reports of the Secretary General to the Security Council on the former Yugoslavia, or I was there trying to craft the suitable instructions to our generals in the field in the middle of trying to keep peace in the middle of a raging war. All of these things, again, they offer a different kind of satisfaction. So when you say which is most satisfying, it's very difficult to find a gradation. I would say that when you're in the moment, you're doing something, the time that you're doing it, that's who you are, that's what matters. And if you do it well, or you do it successfully, or you make a difference, or you pull something off that was otherwise difficult, that's your satisfaction at that moment. But you can't then weigh it against the very different world of opportunities you may have in a different endeavor.
Your election is over, but a BJP spokesperson recently said that you'll be off to the US to pursue another PhD maybe after losing to Rajiv Chandrasekhar,
Acha.
the Thiruvananthapuram seat.
I think
so
that
what
would
is
be...
what is your assessment of the seat which witnessed a triangular
Look, I
contest?
mean, it's not just my assessment. I think if you were to ask a wide selection of journalists who covered the election, as well as political observers and so on, I think you would find almost unanimity. Certainly, as far as I was aware, until you told me about the statement, there hadn't been one person who thought it was going to go any other way but a victory for us. Every indication was there. I went up and down to about 60, 70 booths after casting my vote in the morning throughout the length of and breadth of the constituency. And the enthusiasm of my party workers with the turnout, the people who, each party keeps a table outside with its own workers giving slips, directions and so on to voters coming. And ours were always the ones that were getting the largest crowds, and there were crestfallen looks on the faces of the other two parties. I think we're looking at a very comfortable win. But a win is a win, whatever the margin may be, and I feel at the moment that every indication we've got there is that it's very high. If the BJP has any other indication, it's coming from some other source, but not from the ground.
So, two phases of the Lok Sabha polls are over. How do you see the Congress and the India Bloc placed? And also, overall, how many seats do you expect the Congress and the India Bloc to win?
Look, 190 seats have voted so far. And what I'm picking up from, obviously my sources are going to be more on my side of the equation, so you have to make a discount for that perhaps. But what we're picking up is tremendously positive for our side. We're not suggesting there is an overwhelming wave, but there certainly isn't one for the government. In fact, many who have been following elections for some time say that the difference between this election and both 14 and 19 is that the predominant emotion of BJP voters appears to be indifference and lack of enthusiasm. And that in many places in the Hindi-speaking states whose districts voted, of course, a couple of major southern states have voted as a whole, all of Kerala, all of Tamil Nadu, etc., all of Puducherry. But even from the Hindi-speaking states, our people have come back feeling cautiously optimistic. So I would say that on balance, we are far more ahead than we would have expected to be at this time. Of course, there are 5 more phases to go in this unnecessarily protracted election. I think it's a worthwhile reminder that the entire process is almost 3 months. That is frankly preposterous. My first election was 2009. I had checked in 2004 how long the election took. The same 543 constituencies, it took 20 days. Why does it now need to take 90 days? It doesn't make any sense. And I think somebody has to explain it. It's not as if there has been an increase in violence in this country. It's very surprising that the Election Commission should organize itself in this way. I might add that when you look at some of the states which have multiple phases, there's absolutely no objective reason why they couldn't have had one phase. None whatsoever. One can understand a state like UP having more than one phase. But every other state, up to and including Maharashtra, I think could have been done in a phase, and we could have done and dusted this election much quicker. Especially at a time when our Prime Minister is speaking about one nation, one election. Does it make sense to show that it takes us so long to conduct one election for one Sabha, and that too after we've had so much experience conducting elections? There's something wrong with this picture.
What do you think?
Apart from that, sorry?
What do you think is the reason? Why do they?
You'll have to ask the Election Commission, sir, and I hope you all will. I've been a bit mystified as to why there is no debate about this when the Election Commission made its announcement. All of us who were candidates had to settle down to campaigning and getting organized and moving, and so we did it. But now that the voting is over, and I've been asked by my party to campaign in many other states, I'm just a bit surprised that no one has made this an issue as to why it should take so long. And I think it's really worth asking the question to the Election Commission.
So your prediction of seats?
I'm never, even as a cricket fan, I don't predict cricket scores. I predict victories, and I would say that right now, it looks increasingly likely that the BJP NDA government will lose its majority. The BJP losing its majority seems to me a foregone conclusion. They only had a 32-seat margin in 2019, and that was an election where they maxed out in all their strong states. I mean, imagine 6 states, they won every seat. 3 states, they won all but 1 seat. 2 states, they won all but 2 seats. That's not replicable. It simply isn't. I mean, Haryana, we won no seats last time. The polls are indicating 5 to 7 seats for us in Haryana. So what you're looking at in the situation, Karnataka was 1 seat for Congress last time. This time, polls are ranging from 10 to 17. Some are even saying 20. I don't know what the final number is going to be, but it's not going to be 1. So in every one of these states where the BJP did so well, they're losing some seats in the most conservative analysis. So how do they get anything remotely like, this 400 paar is a joke, 300 par is impossible. 200 par may be a challenge for them to get the way things are going.
Sir, my question is specific to South India. BJP is very hopeful about making fresh inroads in states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Even Prime Minister has said that history will be made when votes are counted on June 4 in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. So what is your assessment about BJP's chances in South India? And you are also claiming that you will improve your show. You are saying North mein BJP will be half and South mein half. But BJP has a different take on that. So how do you see BJP doing in South India? Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana?
Well, 3 of those 4 states are getting 0, and that's Kerala, Tamil Nadu, and Andhra Pradesh. Telangana, last time, if I remember, they got a handful of seats. Was it 2, 3, 4? I can't remember. Very small number of seats. I think they will struggle to hold on to all of those, but if they hold on to all of them, that's it. Karnataka, they're definitely not repeating their amazing result last time. 20 odd, yeah. So that's not happening. We have a government in Karnataka that's genuinely popular, and where a number of the promises made by the Congress party in the elections have already begun to be fulfilled, and people are seeing that. So, they've tasted BJP rule, and I think they know what the reality is. So the South, there is absolutely no doubt that the BJP is going to do worse than last time. In the North, as I said, they did so well last time, it is impossible to replicate. So both in North and South, they're coming down from where they were. Now, how well we do and how well the other India Alliance parties do is yet to be seen, because after all, 353 seats have yet to vote. So there's still a big majority of the election yet to happen. But all indications are that this is really an uphill struggle for the BJP, and things are not going the government's way. But I ask you objectively, as an Indian citizen, why should a young man who voted for the BJP in 2014 because he was promised he's going to get a job very quickly, still vote for the BJP 10 years later when he still doesn't have a job? Simple question. When all the economists are saying that 80% of India's population has seen a decline in its income in the last 10 years, a decline, that all the income gains have gone to the top 20% only, then why should these 80% want to vote for the BJP that has put them in that predicament? What about all the people who lost their jobs in micro and small enterprises that shut down because of demonetisation, a self-inflicted wound by the BJP? What about those families of migrant workers who died because of the BJP's sudden and unprepared lockdown? I mean, you look at, and of course, those who had to float their loved ones' bodies down the Ganga during the second wave of COVID. I mean, you've had enough people with reasons to want the BJP out of office. And so objectively, what was surprising was that people were even willing to swallow the propaganda that they were going to win.
So a counter question to that. The criticism of BJP's economic policies have been there for quite a few years. Mm-hmm. And they still have been doing very well in elections. Lok Sabha elections, they did well in 2019. In assembly elections, they have been doing well. So do you think beyond economy, BJP has been able to connect with people on larger cultural agenda or nationalism, where your party has not been really to challenge the BJP?
No, let's put my party aside for a minute. You made a point about the BJP. Let me respond to that. In 2014, they ran on economics. They ran a disastrous government economically, but in 2019, they ran on national security. Pulwama, Balakot, the entire theme across northern India was that. One of the reasons they didn't do so well in the south was it didn't resonate the same way in the south. But across the north, this was the main theme that drove them. Now, they can't run on the economy because they mishandle the economy and people don't have jobs and people can't afford to buy at the market what they could afford to buy a few years ago. They can't run on national security because everyone knows that China has been nibbling away at our frontier. And there are 26 out of 65 patrolling points where both armies used to patrol that we can no longer patrol. The Indian Army has no access to them now. And that is on Mr. Modi's watch. So how is he going to beat his chest about national security? That leaves what? The Hindu Hriday Samrat message. That leaves Ram Mandir, Ram Janmabhoomi, that leaves the kind of frankly inflammatory language we have been seeing and hearing from the Prime Minister and others, fear-mongering about one community and attempting to polarize the electorate on religion. I think that tactic has really been overused in this country, and it's those who are going to be voting along those lines are already voting for the BJP. But it no longer appeals to neutral voters. And I think the great strength of the BJP between 2009 and 14 was how a lot of people who are not Hindutva voters were attracted to Mr. Modi's economic message and voted for him. He's losing them, or the bulk of them. Similarly, in 2019, a lot of people who didn't particularly like either Hindutva or the economic management said, this is a government that might be able to keep us safe. Look at Balakot and so on. So they voted for them. All those arguments are gone now in 24. How do you manage to win an election in this country on a brazenly communal agenda which appeals to a minority of the populace?
Mr. Tharoor, we saw reservation and constitution dominating the election discourse in the first two phases. Do you think it's going to be same in the other phases? Or it's going to change, given that Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah are claiming now that once in power, India Bloc leaders are going to fight for PM seat. So do you think that narration is going to change now?
Look, I don't know to what extent people are going to be influenced by that. It is true that a coalition government functions very differently from a monolithic one-party government. And particularly given Mr. Modi's style, the personality cult built around him, and the way the BJP has been ruling, I think it's fair to say that it would be very unlike what we've seen in the last 10 years. But on the other hand, the record and experience of the Indian public with coalition governments has been rather good. And if you look at the growth performance, for example, of the Indian economy, it has actually grown better under coalition governments than under single-party governments. And you can look throughout the 75, 77 years of our independence, and you'll see that's true. So in many ways, the advantage of a coalition is that there won't be sort of any autocratic tendencies, whoever becomes Prime Minister. They will have to take into account the others. And frankly, this is the classic political theory of parliamentary systems of governance. Right now, we are seeing a parliamentary system being run presidentially, which is the worst of both worlds. A presidential system, a normal presidential system, has the great merit that the legislature is totally independent of the executive, can challenge the executive and hold it accountable. A parliamentary system, once the executive emerges from the legislature is captured by the executive. Now, we have that system, but it's being run presidentially, so we have the worst of both worlds. Now, what I was going to say is that if you had a coalition government of the India Alliance, you're going to see for the first time in a long while a Prime Minister who's the first among equals, who has to listen to others, take their point of view into account, and who would have to be a good manager. Mr. Vajpayee is considered in many ways an excellent example of that kind of consensus builder. He didn't have a majority, far from it. He had 26 parties in his coalition, but his government was able to deliver effective results and at the same time reassure Indians that they had a functioning government. Dr. Manmohan Singh, he had more seats than Mr. Vajpayee did, but he didn't have a majority either. And the way in which Dr. Manmohan Singh was able to pursue very relentlessly his economic goals and to preside over the best growth period India has ever seen is again a tribute to the fact that he was able to bring his coalition along with him. Now, on one issue, the coalition of UPA 1 broke and the left us and weren't there in UPA 2. So that becomes a different story. And there's always a risk that on some issue of principle, a Prime Minister may have to draw the line with one or more of his coalition partners. But that's again something the nation has seen before, and we've gone past it. We are able to cope. So my own view is, let us be reassured that our history in operating the system and the constitution we have has by and large safeguarded the interests of the Indian people. There have been many periods where people were absolutely doomsaying about our country, and we have come through all those periods. I mean, go back and look at your PTI dispatches of 89 to 91, for example. I mean, you would really be forgiven for thinking the country was going to, in the American expression, going to hell in a handbasket. And look at us. After 91, we had some of the best years of growth and prosperity. I would say to you all that coalition government is nothing to be afraid of. And certainly when I speak to most voters, they are thinking in terms of who is the candidate I'm voting for. What values does he represent or she represent? Who do they want to bring to power in Delhi, and what kind of, how is that power going to be exercised? We'll see. Maybe I'm unduly influenced by the kind of electorate I have been amongst for the last 2 months in Kerala. But I'm now going to travel to many other states, and I'll tell you what I'm picking up wherever I go. My own feeling, frankly, is unchanged, that this is an election for change. And given the long length of time, I fully accept the narrative could once again change. But right now, the BJP has lost its grip on the narrative. The sort of hubristic narrative before the first phase is over. I don't think we're going to hear people saying "Ab ki baar 400 par" again for some time to come.
Coalition governments might be a good thing, but you know, isn't in the run-up to this elections there have been so many contradictions between the alliance partners, even in your state, you know, bitter exchanges. In Delhi, Mr. Lovely left recently. Do you think under that circumstances would a coalition be cohesive?
Look, the only reason you're able to ask this question is because a coalition did try to come together before the elections. If you look at the UPA, it came together after the elections. If you look at Vajpayee Saab's coalition, it was built together after the elections. So the truth is that in our country, coalitions come after polling for the most part. This is an unusual case where a serious attempt was made to bring people together before voting even took place. And it was very clear to all of us, and certainly I've said so in interviews many, many months ago, that the coalition will work on a state-by-state basis. One of the reasons I was saying that is in my own state. It is unthinkable that the Congress, which leads the UDF in Kerala, and the communists who lead the LDF in Kerala would ever be partners in Kerala. It was unthinkable. We have been fighting each other at loggerheads for the last 55 years and alternating in power until the last election. So there was no question at all of that even being feasible. Having said that, right next door in Tamil Nadu, the same parties, CPM, CPI, Congress and our ally, the Muslim League, and the DMK, are all partners, have been partners, have continued to be partners, there's no issue. So each state in our country has its own political character. And you can't just wish that away, sitting in a newspaper office and drawing up a paper strategy. So it was always clear that there would be disagreements depending on each state's narrative, which is why I was not surprised when Aam Aadmi Party said yes in Delhi and no in Punjab. And for that matter, our people said no in Punjab also. So you have to understand that there is a different political character in each state that will determine this kind of outcome. Now, finally, when it comes to the day of reckoning on the 4th of June, I have no doubt that all these parties, whether or not they're campaigning together or against each other, including the TMC, when we have the numbers to prevent the BJP coming to power, we will come together. I have no doubt about that. I have no reason to believe otherwise. In fact, I have friends in parties that are not allied to us and who are telling me after June 4th, we will work together.
Sir, Hindutva is a very strong plank of BJP.
Which is?
Hindutva. And over the years, it has won its share of supporters across the country. And you also wrote a very eloquent book, Why I Am a Hindu. And in that, you offered your vision of Hinduism and how is it different from BJP's brand of Hindutva. But at the same time, your party seems to struggle to offer a alternative vision on that issue to people who is appealed by this Hindutva philosophy. So do you think it's a struggle, it's a dilemma in the party that was very evident during this Ram Temple inauguration, when party turned down the invite and it invited some kind of frustration among within the ranks of the party, some leaders left. So do you think Congress has been in a dilemma in taking on BJP over this issue?
I would say that the perception is particularly a north-centered perception. There are some northern states and some northern politicians who found it difficult to articulate an idiom, as you suggest, that we have not faced that problem in the south. Though even in the south, there are two distinct strands. My approach is by no means the only approach, because there is still a strong base in the south for the classic secular approach, which is a distancing from religion approach, from Hindutva and from Hinduism, whereas mine is a critique of Hindutva from within the Hindu faith. And there is a difference in these two approaches, but we are both critics of Hindutva. And whereas when the Ram Janmabhoomi issue came up, some would say this is a purely political event, we have nothing to do with it. My argument is, why should I surrender Ram to the BJP? Who gave them a copyright on it? At the same time, who gave Mr. Modi the right to go and perform a prana pratishtha in a temple? What is his qualification to do that? So these are different bases for argument, but the argument fundamentally is still against Hindutva, which is not a religious doctrine, it is a political doctrine. And I think where perhaps our people have not sufficiently found the right idiom to express their feelings is in their in the perception that we do not want the average Hindu voter across the north to feel in any way distanced from us. And in struggling to find a form of expression that way, they struggle. Now, the irony is, I come from a very religious constituency. Thiruvananthapuram, by the way, is the city in India with the most temples per square foot or square kilometer, if you want, of any city in India. And therefore, religiosity is something which is so natural in people's daily lives that there is not even any self-consciousness about it. I mean, it was perfectly normal in each day of our campaigning to start at a temple somewhere in a different part of the constituency. And there was no shortage of possible locations to start from. But equally, if we started at a church or a masjid, there was no problem because, again, these are all our brothers and sisters, as it were. And so all of this is the way we live in the South. And I must admit, it's a bit different from the North, where history has been portrayed differently and understood differently, and where some of the cultural expressions of the faith have been expressed differently. Here, I would say the debate seems to be much more between the syncretic view of Indian culture, the Ganga Jamni Tehzeeb on the one hand, and this, what we, for lack of anything else, we might call the Ghuspetia view of Indian culture, which seems to say that we are some sort of pristine Hindu state and everybody else is either a guest or an interloper, an infiltrator, and has no other right to be here. Now, those are two different views, and reconciling those views in the North has been more of a challenge. In the South, much less of a challenge.
Sir, in hindsight, do you think it was a prudent decision on the part of Congress to turn down the invite? And will you go to Ram Temple?
Yeah, no, I've actually answered this question in Kerala. I think the party was right to turn down this invitation for no other reason than it was essentially a political platform for the greater glorification of Prime Minister Modi, who doesn't need more platforms. He's been glorified at every opportunity, from railway station kiosks to vaccination certificates. I mean, we don't really need one more place for him to be showcased and photographed, and to be a supporting cast in that kind of exercise would frankly have been a mistake, in my view, had we done it. As a purely political decision, it was the right one. But once the election is over and the hoo-ha is over, I don't see why any of us as Hindus can't go to any temple in this country. After all, in our personal lives, we have every right to go to. I go to a temple to pray. I don't go to a temple to participate in a political event. And I make no bones about admitting that when I went to an official visit to Nepal, I took time off and went to Pashupatinath, because for me it was, as a Hindu, a temple that I've heard about for a long time and I wanted to see it and worship there. It doesn't mean that I was in any way compromising my official role. And frankly, many other parts of the world would see it this way. I was in Mauritius when I was Minister of State for External Affairs, and I was invited to perform the Abhishekam at the Shiva temple. And I said, I'm very flattered, but you know, why me? Oh, but you're a minister coming from India, you want to. So I said, you know, my predecessor was Mr. E. Ahmed, he was a Muslim. We would have asked him to, if he was willing to do it, he would have been welcome. So, you know, there are people who practice Hinduism in that kind of open, all-encompassing way, which somehow has been downgraded in some way in the discourse in northern India, which I believe is a loss for India and is a loss for Hinduism.
Mr. Tharoor, we'll just go back to the south for a bit.
Yeah.
The Karnataka sex scandal, how badly will it affect the BJP, or will it impact the campaigning at all?
Well, look, I mean, the fact is the gentleman is an ally of the BJP. The BJP has campaigned for him in the recently concluded polls. So they'll have a tough job explaining that you know, if they really had no idea, because it turns out they did have an idea, and that a BJP legislator had access to all of these compromising videos or incriminating videos for some time before the elections. Given these circumstances, I think the damage is to the BJP. Now, the BJP is trying to turn the tables and say, why hasn't the Congress taken any action? Now did the Congress permit him to leave? Fact is that the Congress was unaware of this, and the Congress wasn't given this information. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that the SIT was set up the same day or just after, the day after this gentleman left. So if he hadn't made his timely exit in haste, he might well have been trapped once the SIT was announced, and presumably there would have then been a lookout notice for him. So I think that certainly in the remaining phases, this is going to echo, and I know that it's not just in Karnataka. For example, in next door Telangana, there is a roaring controversy. Some women activists have come out very strongly, saying, when will the patriarchy in this country wake up and realize how women are being abused, and what have they done about it? And it's turning the expression of this feeling is not just against all men in general, but particularly those who are ruling the country today. So all of this is definitely going to have an impact, principally on the BJP, first, and second, on systems that have empowered men like this to be predators as they've been.
Sir, I would like to draw your attention towards this BJP lapping on to Sam Pitroda's recent comment about inheritance tax. So I want to know your views on this.
Look, I know Sam Pitroda as a very respected elder, but he doesn't even live in India. He's like a sort of a guru on a mountaintop, except his mountaintop is Chicago and not the Himalayas. And he is perfectly entitled to express his personal views. But what the Congress party is contesting this election on is a manifesto that's a published document. I was a member of the manifesto committee, so I can tell you we never even discussed inheritance tax. It is a personal view. The inheritance tax was abolished by a Congress Prime Minister, Rajiv Gandhi, in 1985. And the fact is that when the BJP cynically said that he did it to save his own inheritance, we were able to point out accurately that the law only kicked into effect from deaths occurring after 15th of March 85, and Indira Ji had died already in 84, been murdered. So it was done because, let's face it, as I have seen in my own constituency, billionaires are very good at managing the reporting of their assets in such a way that they pay very little in their own names. And the government discovered that the cost of collection was exceeding the revenues coming to the government. We were, in 1985, the government of India was earning 20 crores from the entire year of inheritance tax collection. And we were spending far more than that in running an establishment to look at all this. So it was a right decision to abolish it. And the only party that has since even floated the idea of considering an inheritance tax is the BJP, which in 2019 had the finance minister, the MOS finance, and other leading lights speaking in terms of, wouldn't this be a good idea? And it was shot down within their own party. It never happened. But the truth is that it is something that the only party in the national political space to have raised is the BJP, and the Congress party is nothing to do with this. So for them to turn it around and use it against us is one more measure of their desperation. I think all the numbers I was giving you all earlier, they can do the same calculation that I can. And they realize they have defeat staring them in the face, and they're flailing about for any weapon they can use. The truth is not an obstacle in any case for many of these folks. And so invent things that the Congress has never put in its manifesto and say the Congress is going to do this. And I will say very bluntly, I'm not sure that this is something that the voters are going to be very swayed by, because the truth of the matter is, you need to have a certain amount of economic levels of comfort before you worry about things like how much the government is going to take away from you. The ordinary person, I think, really wants to see that their prospects grow, they have more money coming into their pocket every month, they get a job that pays them a salary. Those are the issues that really matter, and not some fanciful notion of whether their inheritance is going to be taken away. But having said that, we are not going to take away the inheritance anyway.
Dr. Tharoor, much as we love your views on politics, I think we would like to know more about Dr. Tharoor, the person, the humanist, the logophile, the orator. You created quite a bit of a controversy when you made that comment about cattle class, traveling in cattle class. Do you think that Indians lack a sense of humor, or is it that Indians are very thin-skinned and they do not have the ability to laugh at themselves?
All of the above may be true. I've written a couple of rueful articles about that episode and about the general issue of humor in politics. But in fact, in that particular case, I was totally not guilty. The question I was asked was, now with the austerity drive, Mr. Minister, will you travel cattle class? It was a question asked on Twitter by a chap who's now a very senior member of the BJP. So, I mean, he was a journalist in those days, and he wrote a question using a phrase. Now, I had just come from America earlier that year, where it's an extremely common expression. It's been in circulation for 30 years. It does not disparage any of the travelers. It disparages the airlines and the airline industry for treating human beings like cattle. So I replied flippantly, in those days, Twitter had barely, a handful of people reading it. I replied flippantly, yes, I will travel in cattle class out of solidarity with all our holy cows. It was a joke in the same spirit as the question, or so I thought. Little did I anticipate, because I went off to Africa the same day on an official visit. And so I was literally traveling almost 24 hours. We had to go via Brussels, change planes again in Accra. I ended up in Liberia when at a reception thrown in my honor, the people buzzing about this news from India that even my own party was calling for my resignation because of and I thought the holy cows must have offended somebody, but no one was reacting to that. It was the cattle class. So, no, but then it taught me a very valuable lesson that I've held very precious ever since, which is to quote Shakespeare, which I should have known. The success of a jest Shakespeare wrote 400 years ago resides not in the tongue of the teller, but in the ear of the hearer. And for a politician, there could be no better motto that it doesn't matter what your intentions are, what you're trying to say. All that matters is what people believe or can be told to believe that you have said. And after that, I've been extremely careful and indeed been very, very wary. I stopped cracking jokes after that. But then even some words were deliberately twisted. You may remember the same year when I used another UN word, interlocutor. When I said, Saudi Arabia is a valuable interlocutor. And a particularly malicious journalist decided that I actually meant intermediary and said that I was completely destroying Indian foreign policy by making Saudi Arabia an intermediary, which I had never said. Interlocutor means, right now you are my interlocutor, I'm your interlocutor. We're talking to each other. That's all it means. It's a very banal word in diplomatic discourse in the United Nations. So I learned that never use a word unless you're 100% sure that everyone understands it, that it can be translated in the same way in 22 languages, and that no one will misunderstand you. It became a bit of a challenge for me. And then, of course, came my tweet about a particular journalist, which then got me this reputation of being a wielder of impossible words. And the irony was I was using words that I would have used and had used in St. Stephen's College debates in India 40 or 50 years previously. But what to do? I got saddled with that.
So just to come back to that question, are Indians not able to take humor? I'm trying to get you into trouble, actually.
You are, I can
yes.
see that. No, Indians have a great sense of humor, especially Punjabis who have good jokes about themselves. No, the truth is that politics is a place where humor has found it difficult to fly. I've found that there are some jokes that people do get and enjoy in Parliament, and every year some intrepid bureaucrat does a collection of wit and humor in Parliament, not all of which is very funny, but that's about as far as you can go in Parliament without causing offense. But I think part of the problem is Indians in politics have become very thin-skinned over the years. And so the desire not to cause offense outstrips the desire to make people laugh. And so you end up with this kind of relatively humorless politics. By comparison with what you see in other Western democracies and so on. And we are not a Western democracy, we are an Indian democracy, but nonetheless, in democracies, a certain amount of humor is not a bad thing. And you'll see examples of this floating around YouTube periodically from other countries. Very little that you can put out from our parliament about showing humor at its best that neither particularly causes offense, but at the same time is funny and does make a point. That combination is not always easy to pull off, particularly in a multilingual country.
Dr. Tharoor, you were picked by PM Modi as one of the brand ambassadors
for Swachh Bharat. Yeah.
For the Swachh Bharat. And many occasions you have praised Modi and his governance as well. My question to you is, what do you think of him as a Prime Minister? And in your fair and honest assessment of him, what are his strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I've written an entire book summarizing my view. I think he's often said all the right things, he's often done all the wrong things. That's my short summary. And nowadays he's not even saying the right things. I've expressed, and I should express to you as well, my great disappointment at his last few statements, which are unworthy of a Prime Minister and unworthy of the office he holds. A Prime Minister is a Prime Minister for all Indians, of every religion, every background. And we all want to respect the office of Prime Minister and the incumbent in that position. I could not believe some of the things I was hearing coming from a Prime Minister. It's never happened before in the history of our country, and I hope it never happens again. And I hope it doesn't get repeated from his own lips either. But it does seem to me that there are some standards of civilized discourse in any country's politics which have not been upheld in the Prime Minister's last few statements. It's been truly, truly disappointing. Having said that, there are many things that I've acknowledged in the past that he's done right. I'm not going to use this occasion in the middle of an election campaign to repeat those things, because that's the wrong time to do it. When the election results are done and we are all writing an assessment of the departing Prime Minister, I will certainly have good things to say about some things. And I will also point to the reasons why that departure was a welcome departure.
Was English always your favorite subject, or it just happened to be that you know?
What is the point of studying a subject you love? I read widely and indiscriminately because I was an asthmatic child. Very severely asthmatic child. I was born in London. My parents moved to India when I was 2.5. And from day one, I started reacting very badly. I had massive bronchitis. These are days before bronchodilators and inhalers and nebulizers and all that. So all you could get was these really strong tablets that made your heart beat like a drum. And you're 2.5, 3 years old. You're sitting up, unable to sleep, unable to breathe if you lie down, unable to go play with your friends. Kind of a tough life. So I just started reading. I began reading before I was 3 years old. 2.5 is what my parents say. And I started reading wildly and indiscriminately. I was the eldest child in the family, so I had no elder brothers or sisters to borrow books from. When I was well enough to go to the library, I would finish the book in the car on the way home. So then I started reading my parents' books, most of which I couldn't understand, but I started developing an interest in words, in narratives, and of course, understanding meanings. I was too lazy to look up dictionaries, but if I came across the same word in 3 different books, in 3 different contexts, the meaning, the nuance, the usage became pretty clear to me. So that's how I became a lover of words. And I never even considered studying English honors or whatever. I mean, I was interested in history. And for me, language was a means to understanding the world, to depicting the world, and to sharing the world with others. It was never an end in itself. And to some degree, I feel it's slightly ironic that I've been dubbed as the sort of language maven in the Indian context, because most linguophiles love language for its own sake, whereas I'm an instrumentalist. I love language as a means to unlock the doors of knowledge, of experience, of reading, of various kinds of pleasure that come from knowing language. And that's why, though I've written yet another book on words, The Persuasion of my publishers, it'll come out in September, October this year. I've tried not to just talk about words for their own sake, but how words can be used in ways that can impart pleasure and meaning to your lives.
You must be a very happy man. Sanju Samson is in the
Yes.
team. Did you congratulate him personally? Did you
Yes,
call him up?
of course I congratulated him personally and publicly as well. Look, I mean, a lot of us, and not only in Kerala, have felt that he's had a raw deal from the selectors over many years. And if you look at the number of opportunities he's had by comparison with people who are younger than him and whose record is not as good as his, it is truly inexplicable that he's only played, 16 ODIs and 20 T20s or something like that. And you look at the guy's record, okay, the one thing they accuse him of is inconsistency. But it's not as if every player who's got a long rope has always been consistent. It's the nature, and these are sports where human performance is an issue. Sometimes you'll succeed, sometimes you'll fail. And if you succeed more often than you fail, you become a great. I mean, that's essentially what sport is all about. But you've got to be given the chance to succeed more often than you fail. But if you're dropped after every failure, in his case, dropped twice after a success, he scored an ODI century and he wasn't picked in the next ODI. So, I mean, that series was over. He played in the last ODI of a series, got a century. And when the next ODI series came along, he wasn't picked. It seemed to me that there was something wrong here. So I'm glad that he made an irresistible case for his selection through his performances in the IPL this time. And some say exhibited a new consistency, because there's been practically no innings where he has failed because of a rash shot or something like that. And he's had a number of not-out scores. He's got an average of 77 in the IPL, which is the highest average of any batsman in the IPL. I think he's a very, very good choice. And what people are forgetting when they say, oh, how does it matter why you're celebrating? He's going to be sitting on the bench. Not true. I think he's going to be the first alternative batsman if a batsman picks up an injury or loses form, because he can bat literally anywhere from number 1 to number 6 and make runs. So he's really turning out to be, I think, in my view, a very good selection for this team. Thank you all very much for this. I hope you really will use it all.
Of course,
Thank
of
you.
course.
Good.
Thank you so much.